Master Your Mindset Radio, episode 59.
Welcome to Master Your Mindset Radio, the show where we empower you to conquer limiting beliefs and transform your world with your gifting and purpose. Now for your host, Elizabeth Nader.
Hey friends, welcome back to another episode. Grab your coffee, grab your tea, and let's chat a little bit. But first, one last plug for Mindset Reset 2020. Don't forget, it's this Saturday. You can attend live virtually or watch the sessions later, but this is all about helping you overcome. And I'm teaching as well as 3 other amazing coaches. So mindsetreset2020.com. That's your last plug before Saturday, before this goes live. And I really hope to see you there and that you join the big group of people who are participating in this. All right, so today we are going to talk about the fear of rejection. Rejection, this is a tough one. Now, some of you may immediately react to that with a lot of heavy emotion because you know that you deal with rejection, that you struggle with rejection, that you have a fear of rejection. Some of you may say, this podcast isn't for me. I don't deal with the fear of rejection, but I want you to pause before you turn me off and consider that in fact you probably do. I think it is a universal fear, and I'm going to tell you why. In fact, psychologists say it's the number one fear that people have is the fear of rejection, but it may show up in ways that you don't recognize, and we want to talk about that today. But they say it's the number one fear. Now, I've heard public speaking is the number one fear, but in fact, let's think about that for a minute. It's really the same, isn't it? I mean, the fear of rejection is actually the fear of shame. It's coming down to that, right? The fear of feeling stupid, the fear of being in a situation where we stand out and we don't look our best, being in a situation where someone doesn't want us. We're going to dive into that more, but that's why I think it's okay to say that the fear of rejection is number one, and so is public speaking, because frankly, to me, they're very equal, I think, in people's eyes. And if you can conquer one, perhaps you can conquer the other because they are so related. So if the number one fear people have is rejection, you have to also consider that the number one need that people have is acceptance. And we know this to be true. All psychologists would agree to that. The number one need that people have is acceptance or belonging. So you can see how that fear and that need are tied very close to each other. So we want to talk about where this fear of rejection comes from. We also want to talk about how it shows up in your life, how you can combat it, but also maybe you need to embrace rejection sometimes. Maybe rejection is actually redirection and it's the best thing that could happen to you. So let's unpack some of that to give you some tools and some things to think about. First of all, where does this fear of rejection come from? Obviously, like any other limiting belief, right, that we talk about, it comes from our past, it comes from difficult experiences, it comes from trauma, it comes from even small things that happen to us that someone in authority said to us, or large events in our life that are traumatizing or difficult. The fear of rejection can show up in so many ways. It's not just necessarily a direct rejection. So obviously, if I'm in middle school and I'm rejected by all of my friends and I go through that traumatic experience that often kids do at some point, that is very clearly rejection, right? That's very clearly something where that hurts me and I process that as though people don't want me, and then I fear the repercussions of that happening to me in the future. But also another fear of rejection can come from death. If you've lost a loved one, if someone has died really before their time, a lot of times we can process that as a rejection. And so it's really a bigger category of feelings. I know I can share with you personally, I was 23 years old when my dad died at 51. He died at 51 of pancreatic cancer, and it was a quick, unexpected death. Unexpected in so many ways and very tragic. And I can tell you that from an emotional and psychological standpoint, I noticed I was processing that death as a rejection. That's how I was dealing with it, because I know the dreams that I would have and the fears that I would have and things that maybe I didn't realize but were in my subconscious were sort of my dad rejecting me. Well, the truth is my father, in the natural never rejected me. He didn't. He was a great father. I didn't have that experience with him. And of course, he didn't want to die, right? He didn't want to die then. But I processed it as a rejection. And so we have to consider the fact that rejection and the way that it actually starts to become part of our fears or writes itself on our subconscious or becomes a limiting belief is not just from the obvious rejection of somebody to you, not from the obvious someone's breaking up with you, a divorce, a loss of a friendship, a loss of a job. Being rejected can also show up in other ways unintentionally, but it's how we process it mentally that it's still a rejection, because really it's a desire to protect ourselves, right? I mean, the fear of rejection, what it does is stimulate a desire to protect ourselves from further pain. That's what we want to do. So even an untimely death, the way that our subconscious reacts to that is to say, I don't want to go through that again. That's a rejection. That was so painful. So I'm going to insulate myself even further. And a lot of us spend our adult life, and we start actually not just our adult life, we start doing it in childhood, putting on layers and insulating ourselves from repeated pain, insulating ourselves from possibly being hurt again. And that's what rejection does. It forces that behavior without us even realizing it, because of course we want to avoid pain, doesn't everyone? And subconsciously we want to do it. So we start to put it in protections, and we start to layer protections against pain. And so we develop this fear of rejection. We develop this fear of experiencing that again, because we know how painful it is. Now think about your childhood. You may have been rejected by a parent. You may have been rejected by a sibling, by friends, by people in authority. Whatever that story is, wherever that pain comes from for you, it's likely rooted in some form of rejection. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone that deals with this is, you can look at them and say, oh, they're dealing with the fear of rejection. Look how timid they are. Look how they pull back. Look how they avoid situations. Not true. Not true. Yes, it shows up that way in some people, but the truth is that there are many people who are outwardly bold, who are outwardly maybe even aggressive in life or extroverted or whatever, who hide it behind all of that. They hide their fear of rejection behind a big personality, behind a big presence, behind pushing themselves, behind achievements. But the truth is, when they go home at night and they shut that door, they're still also dealing with the fear of rejection. And that fear causes them to make decisions in their life that keep them insulated and keep them from being hurt. That person may not pull back, whereas somebody else may actually pull back from life. Some people, yes, they react to the fear of rejection and to rejection itself by pulling back, by hiding, by doing less, by being less, by becoming passive. But others take it in the opposite direction. So don't assume that when you see someone that you consider to be strong, that you consider to be bold, that they're not dealing with a fear of rejection themselves. Everyone has to deal with it and process it, because we all go through difficult times, and we all go through moments in life that can plant that rejection seed within us and really plant a fear of that happening again and going through that pain again. And those of us that are trying to talk about it and deal with it and process it, we have a chance at getting past it. But those of us who are unwilling to talk about it, it's going to be with you forever. You have to uncover it. You have to shed light on it. You have to recognize it for what it is. Even if you're not presently able to get past that fear, at least you need to shed light on it, see it for what it is, see how it shows up in your life, and see how it holds you back. Because that's what it does, doesn't it? The fear of rejection is the ultimate tool to hold you back. It keeps you from, in many cases, from going deep in relationships or from relationships altogether. It keeps you from reaching for something in your career, in your business, in your personal life. It keeps you sometimes from moving forward. And if you do move forward while you have a fear of rejection, it keeps you from going deep. So that person I talked about that seems bold and aggressive and is a big presence in life, sometimes if they're dealing with that fear of rejection and they haven't dealt with those past pains, they're an inch deep, if you know what I mean. They don't actually commit themselves deep enough to risk being hurt. So don't assume, again, that people that on the outside are one way that aren't dealing with that on the inside. The fear of rejection can live with you until adulthood easily and be something that if you don't address it, holds you back. And even if it doesn't hold you back in an obvious way from opportunity, from relationships, it will hold you back from experiencing the way you were meant to. You know, if you have a fear of rejection in a relationship, but you pursue relationships anyway, it will keep you from going very deep, because the moment you feel insecure or exposed, the moment you think that person can hurt me, the moment you think that if I share too much, I might get rejected, you will pull back. And you may maintain that relationship, but you won't take it where it could go. And so you miss out in life. You miss out on the deep opportunities and experiences that are there for us. So where are these messages coming from? They're coming from self-preservation. They're coming from pain. They're coming from things that were done to you. And you know, especially when you were young, that maybe you had no part in, but you felt that rejection. A baby can feel rejection. It is, again, the number one need we have is to feel belonging, the need of belonging, the feeling of belonging, and the need to be accepted. And we feel that as a baby. In fact, they've done studies, just horrible, sad things in orphanages where if babies are left in their cribs and not tended to more than just simple things, not held, the babies can literally die from the lack of affection, from the lack of belonging, from that rejection. It is literally for them something that can actually cause them to die. So as babies, we feel it. As babies, we know if we belong, if we're accepted, if we're loved, we can sense rejection. And of course, our ability to sense it only grows as we grow. And there are many things that happen to us along the way that can stimulate that fear of rejection. And no one escapes it. No one can say in their childhood nothing happened to them. If it didn't happen within your family, it happened at school, right? With a teacher or with friends. And if it didn't happen then, maybe, you know, it happened in athletics where you were cut from a team. There is rejection all over the map of our lives. It's how we deal with it that makes it either a deep-rooted fear or just something that we manage and that in fact we can turn for our good. So I want you to think about the areas in your life where you felt rejection and be honest with yourself. No one's looking right now. No one knows what you're thinking, but be willing to be honest with yourself and say, I do feel areas of rejection, and where do they come from? You know, it's a limiting belief. So you can use my 14-step process to go through that to identify where that comes from. Some of you know immediately where your fear of rejection comes from. Others of you need to dig a little bit and understand that you process certain events in your life as rejection, and therefore it set you up to have that fear of rejection. So we need to discover where it's coming from. We need to recognize it as a limiting belief, and that it's okay that we have a deep need to belong. It's okay. And that we need to deal with our feeling of rejection so it doesn't hold us back. Now, there's one other thing, though, that I want to make sure you're armed with, and that is ways to combat it. So it's one thing to discover where it comes from, and I think that is a great process and a great exercise, because often that will take the power away from it, just the discovery of why do I feel that, where does it come from, and that's an opportunity for healing in itself, for forgiveness, for all of that. But when you look at combating it, how do you do that? And I think that that's all about telling yourself the truth. And you need to look at, what am I losing out on by letting my fear of rejection keep me small? And what do I have to gain by overcoming that fear of rejection? And really, if I take this risk, whether it's in a relationship, going deep in a relationship, whether it's applying for a job, whether it's starting a business, whatever it is, trying out for a sports team, if I take that step, what's the worst thing that can happen? And of course, the worst thing that can happen is it doesn't work out. And if you recognize that you can survive that, if you recognize that you already know what rejection feels like and you can survive it, if you realize that pain is part of life and you're willing to deal with it, and that you can take that hit, and those messages coming to you aren't really from you, they're from your past, right? They're from your pain, that you can replace those messages and you can say, I am willing to experience failure, and I will not see it as rejection. And I understand that the upside is much better than the downside. And that if I don't move forward in life and I don't try to experience these things which hold the threat of rejection and threat of failure, then I'll never know the thrill of success and the thrill of acceptance. Because if you don't take the risk, if you're not willing to experience potentially rejection and failure, then you won't get closer to what you want in life. Every time that we fail and we get back up, it's a step closer to what we want. Rejection gets you closer to what you want. So I say, is it rejection or is it redirection? How we choose to look at those failures, how we choose to look at those things that we didn't get when we thought we needed them, the way we choose to look at the relationships in our life and experiences that maybe were not positive, is all about what our next step is, right? It's all about how we deal with it. And it can either take us closer to what we need in life and closer to where we're supposed to be, or it can make us stand still, or worse, take us backwards. Rejection really is a form of failure, right? And that's how we process it. But I always say you either succeed or you learn. So how are you choosing to deal with the inevitable rejection? Rejection is always going to be with us. It's going to happen in big ways and small ways in our life. But how are we dealing with it? Can you disconnect it from the feeling of shame? Can you tell yourself, being rejected or failing has nothing to do with shame, and I refuse to feel shame surrounding it. I'm going to let myself feel vulnerable and be vulnerable because that makes me real. And that allows me to experience life in a way where when I do succeed and when things do happen the way that I hope for, I experience life in its best form. But if I hide, if I'm passive, if I'm a, people pleaser because I don't want anyone to reject me, I don't experience life in the way that I could. And that rejection and failure is actually an opportunity. And it's actually a beginning if you choose to see it that way. It's a beginning of something new. So you adjust. So you try something different. If it's something within a relationship, then you dig deeper. You embolden yourself to go closer to that person and to figure out why that rejection is there and to solve that issue, to solve that gulf between you. It only promises to bring you more opportunity. But that is your choice, isn't it? Ultimately, what you focus on enlarges. Your choice is how you experience, how you choose to experience, react to the rejections that are inevitable in life, and how you choose to show up in life. If everything you do is to avoid feeling rejected, then you will stand still. No matter what it looks like on the outside, on the inside, you will be paralyzed by that, and you will not experience what life has for you. So we have to understand rejection is in our past, rejection is in our present, rejection is in our future. How will you choose to address it? How will you choose to see it? And will you let it move you forward? Will you let it be a sign that you're going to redirect, try something different, that it's not something to stop you, and it's not something to feel shame about, and that you need to address those limiting beliefs and those lies that you've told yourself for years in some cases because of the pain that you felt in the past. Some of these lies are easier to combat than others. I gave the example of my father. It was relatively easy for me to say to myself, my father didn't reject me. He didn't want to die. We had a great loving relationship. That seems like an easy lie to overcome, but the pain was so deep in my subconscious that I had to work on that literally so I would stop having these dreams about him rejecting me. They made no sense, but I had to combat that lie so that it didn't make me feel small, that I wasn't scared of that happening again in my life with someone that I love. So I refuse to live with that. So I did the work. I encourage you to do the work. It may be difficult. It will be hard on some level. Some may be very difficult because you have to choose to be vulnerable. You have to choose to accept failure and look at it correctly. You have to choose to be willing to look at yourself differently. You have to choose to be willing to open yourself up to others. And we know how to do that. We just purposely don't do it to protect ourselves. So I want to leave you with something. What would you tell your best friend to do if he or she were dealing with the fear of rejection or dealing with failure? What would you tell them to do? Because ironically, we tend to give the best advice to others that we don't live ourselves. It's easy to tell someone else, right? But think about that. What would you tell your best friend to do? Do that for yourself. Love yourself enough to be willing to face all of this and live your best life. Have a great week, guys, and I will see you online.
Thank you for listening to Master Your Mindset Radio. Before you go, if you want to be part of a free online community of like-minded individuals for support, resources, and inspiration as you conquer your limiting beliefs and pursue your purpose, go to elizabethnader.com/community. That's elizabethnader.com/community, or search for Master Your Mindset Academy private group on Facebook. Looking forward to seeing you online.